So in 58 BCE, Caesar, after a couple of years of fighting Gallic rebellions on the northern frontier of the Roman Republic, and because of a broken treaty with one of these Celtic groups, sets out on a campaign that is known as the Gallic Wars. And Caesar writes this, right? Remember, the winners write history. Caesar ultimately wins this, and so he writes his own propaganda almost about the conquest of the Gallic Wars. And a lot of what we see here is based on his written records. So according to Caesar, in 58 BCE, he sets out and he conquers the Helvetii, which includes the site of La Tène here in modern Switzerland, and he quickly pacifies them because they are the largest, richest, and most well-organized of this. In 57 BCE, he moves up to the Belgae. They control the Rhine, access to the North Atlantic, an incredibly important trade connection, and he quickly defeats them. In 56 BCE, he turns over to the Veneti, and they have access to a lot of lumber and the tin that's coming out of modern Britain. And in 55-54 BCE, he wages war against the Briton leaders and conquers them relatively quickly, and then they pay tribute to him. So in about 5 years, Caesar has conquered the most prominent of the Celtic groups, controlled 2 regions of the most important trade, and pacified the first Roman expansion into the island of Great Britain. And so what he's done is he's made himself incredibly rich already. He's paid off his debts. However, this has led to a kind of an uprising, right? The Celts are looking around, seeing Caesar march all over Hellengon through this, and they're like, we got to do something. And so an initial rebellion rises up in 53 BCE, and it's quickly put down by Caesar and his legions. But then a council of Celtic leaders comes together, and they elect an individual named Vercingetorix, the king of the Auvergne here in southern France, as their leader. And Vercingetorix is, at the same time as Caesar, an incredibly smart military statistician, right? He is he realizes he can't defeat the Roman legions in open battle, so he wages a guerrilla campaign. And basically, it's a scorched earth campaign. He burns villages, Roman settlements everywhere he can find them. He attacks, his cavalry raids on the legion flanks, basically hit and run attacks, and he basically pesters Caesar. And then eventually he defeats Caesar in a relatively large battle, and it's the first time Caesar has lost during the Gallic Wars. But at the same time, to do that, he realizes he needs more support. And eventually, all of these Gallic groups Celtic groups who had signed over and been defeated, started to rise up, bit by bit, and start to support Vercingetorix. And Caesar kind of sees the writing on the wall in this. Now, in order to kind of dodge Caesar, Vercingetorix moves back to the site of Alesia. And I've asked you to watch a video. I really kind of hate myself for assigning a BuzzFeed video on this, on ruining history, but I think it's incredibly informative and rather entertaining as well. But what we see is that Vercingetorix falls back to the site of Alesia. Now, this has been identified in modern France today. It's a hilltop fortress, relatively large, covering about 90 hectares, and probably had an independent population of around 4,000 to 5,000 people. And so Vercingetorix takes up refuge inside of the city of Alesia. And his basic idea is to wait for reinforcements to arrive so he can then defeat Caesar in battle. And so Caesar then basically pulls off one of the greatest feats of military ingenuity in history. He builds a circumvallation wall, that is a 16-kilometer wall around Alesia to keep Vercingetorix in. And so what he's done is essentially laid siege to the city. But at the same time, Caesar finds out that Vercingetorix had sent out messengers and that a large Gallic Celtic army is coming to free the city. And so Caesar then builds another wall between himself and the exterior Gauls. So he's basically trapped himself inside a series of fortification walls around the city of Alesia. And this lays stage to the final battle of the Gallic War. Eventually, Caesar and the 50,000 legions are able to defeat, according to Caesar, the 300,000 Gallic soldiers. I think we can kind of knock that down as a propaganda kind of idea. But we are probably looking at Caesar being outnumbered 2 to 3 to 1, and still holding ground within the fortification walls. Now, the really cool part about this is archaeologically, all of this can be confirmed. The excavation accounts first conducted in the 1860s and then or 1830s by Napoleon. He ordered the identification excavations of this, and then later in the 1990s have verified the Roman account of the battle. Archaeologists have found the multi-levels of defensive fortifications, the trenches and the moats that were dug by the Roman engineers to protect the walls. And then we also see that the city was destroyed sometime in the 1st century BCE and then reconstructed around a Roman plan. And that's what you can kind of see here, the reconstruction of the Roman Forum. We have a Roman Forum, the center, a marketplace, there's an amphitheater and temple to Roman deities, but the people who lived here were largely Celtic. They maintained their Celtic style households, the small wooden thatched houses that we see. Right, so everything we can see in Caesar's account of the battle has been archaeologically verified at this site of Alesia. It's become somewhat of a symbol for resistance among the French, in particular for Vercingetorix as the kind of hero figure here to the resistance of the Roman Empire. And there is a large copper statue of Vercingetorix that was erected in the 1860s after the first set of excavations that sits on top of the citadel at the site. Now, one of the things that we don't see here is a lot of the large-scale evidence for the mass graves and the battle itself. So even though we can identify the fortifications and the ramps, the destruction of the city itself, we're missing a lot of that archaeological data, and that likely has something to do with the level of the earliest excavations and their detail in the 1830s.